Local productions seen on Delta College Public Media are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Redford, and this is the follow-up. Coming up on tonight's show, education is our focus tonight. So many issues to cover, from school choice to staffing to virtual learning, you name it. Education is certainly a hot-button issue and on the minds of many voters when they head to the ballot box in November. Our guests tonight are two people who work in the front lines of education every day, and you'll meet both of them in just a moment. But first, we have viewer feedback from last week's show here on the follow-up when we focused on the Voting Rights Proposal 2 on the ballot. Here are two viewer calls we received on the follow-up hotline.
Yeah, all citizens should have the right to vote without being harassed or intimidated or restricted of the people, by the people, and for the people. Bye-bye.
I would like to know the people that are in prison, the county prison, or in prison for life or 10 years or 20 years. Do they have the right to vote?
And the answer to that question is no. If someone is serving time in jail or prison at a time of an election, they are not allowed to cast a vote. However, once they serve their sentence, in many cases, their voting rights can be reinstated. Thanks for dialing in. We'd like to hear from more of you to help drive the conversation here on the show. You can do that in a variety of ways via social media on Facebook and Twitter. You can email us. There's the information on your screen. You can dial into our follow-up hotline, as those viewers just did, and suggest future show topics. And if you'd like to see any of our past shows, just log on to deltacollegepublicmedia.org. Now for tonight's show, we have our two esteemed guests. As I said, they are experts in education. They work this game every single day. We have Ben DeGrow. He is with ExcelinEd. It's the Policy Director of Education Choice. He used to be with the Mackinac Center. And Grant Hegenauer, he is the Frankenmuth School Superintendent. Guys, thanks for coming in.
Thank
It's
you.
nice to have guests in the studio after Mass and Zooming and all that kind of thing. So,
Yes, sir.
before we dive deep into the conversation, I think it's important the viewers know a little bit about you, kind of the work that you do and who you're with. So Ben, I'm going to start with you. Tell us about your role at ExcelinEd. It's a new role for you. And tell us a little about ExcelinEd.
Right, so ExcelinEd, or it's short for the Foundation for Excellence in Education. It really comes out of the education reform agenda of former Governor Jeb Bush. When he was the governor of Florida, had a really successful track record. And as he likes to say, reform is never finished, it's never completed. And so the idea is to take the best ideas we learned from that, advance research and understand, how can we implement these policies in other states. So we work with policymakers, the legislators, and the people who put them into place, and state education departments, and advocates, really just to advance things like education choice and opportunity, which is my area, but also things related to accountability and literacy and other areas that are just part of that vision.
Okay. Grant, your turn. Frankenmuth School Superintendent, but your journey to Frankenmuth has been varied. You've been in a lot of different school districts, so tell us about your path a little bit.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, I'm a public educator for 28 years, 15 years with the Swords Creek School District as a teacher, coach, and assistant principal athletic director. I was given the opportunity then to move on to Byron area schools to be their 7 through 12 principal, overseeing the administration side as well as career technical education. And then 3 years with Montrose Community Schools as the high school principal at Hill McCloy High School and also the CTE director there. Then given the opportunity to finally lead the Frankenmuth School District going into my second year.
Well, you two are the right guys to talk about some of these issues. So let's start with school choice. Everybody's talking about it. You don't even have to have a parent, a kid in schools to get into this thing and its impact. So Arizona's one has passed the most expansive school choice program in the country. Other states may follow suit. So why don't we talk a little bit about that, Ben, and why that might be good for Michigan. So what are we talking expansive in Arizona?
Right, well, Arizona is just the latest and the biggest example of this we've seen. School choice, the modern school choice movement is probably about 30 years old. And it encompasses everything from families having the right to cross one district to another public district school, the creation of charter schools, which are public schools, open enrollment schools that are have independent boards and run different models. And then you have private school choice, which incorporates things like vouchers and scholarships. And the latest, which is education savings accounts, and that's what we see in Arizona, which is this notion that you give the family who's eligible access to a fund that's relative to the amount of funding they would receive in a public school, and they can take those funds under state supervision and purchase things like private school tuition, but also things like pay for therapies for their child who has special needs, or transportation to a school, or a whole array of education expenses. And so it's this kind of cutting edge of customizing your kids' education, giving more flexibility to families, and that's what Arizona just opened the door for. Every student in the state now has that option to sign up for one of these accounts. And so we're seeing this really growing as a trend.
So Grant, you can kind of take it from there. I mean, you heard him talk. I know you know a bit about that. We do have school choice with some limitations in Frankenmuth. So
Correct.
what are your thoughts on
Correct. When we look at school of choice from Frankenmuth's standpoint, or from our eyes, we're a limited school district, which means we've maxed out a number of seats per grade level. So for instance, with our K through 8 programs, we have 90 seats per grade. That if we have the opportunity and the opening of, let's say, first grade has 70 to 7, let's say they have 70 students, that could give us the possibility of another 20 students coming to Frankenmuth through the School of Choice program, which is an application process for individuals outside the school district. What we tend to say, though, is we do a limited for focus on 2 points. Number one, we like to have a steady budget. We want to know our fiscal responsibility for the community to make sure that we can actually offer programs for our students based on a year in, year out basis, short term and long term. But also by keeping that cap and making sure that we don't go over that number or have an unlimited school of choice, we don't lose the traditions and the values that our community is known for. And we feel that if you grow too quickly or have too many school of choice students coming in, that there's a possibility that our local district that would have to go for a millage and possibly expand on billings, the people that live there might not approve of that. So, I focus in on looking at it, from our standpoint, tradition, culture, and the climate of the community is very important to our values.
So Ben, as you listen to what they're doing in Frankenmuth, is that unique, or do you see a lot of districts kind of doing it that way with some restrictions, some limitations, already sort of doing some of that, right?
Well, yeah, in the Michigan context, most districts are going to align, more or less with what Frankenmuth is doing. So Michigan, if you look nationally, as far as the percentage of kids in the public school system who are doing one of these options, whether it's attending another district outside where they live, or it's a charter school, we're talking about 25% of kids. I mean, so within the public school system, choice is pretty robust. And so we've seen the interest and the demand for families wanting more options, though, escalate in the last few years with the experiences with COVID education, parents being able to see what happened when their kids brought their learning home, and the variety of kind of quality of learning that they got was all over the map. And so parents have dealt with more frustrations with their kids' learning. We've seen those results borne out in the research, the lost learning, and all these things. So families are seeking different kinds of opportunities, whether it's interdistrict schools of choice, education savings accounts, or other things.
So opponents of sort of the school choice, the widespread school choice, will say a couple things. That the church is indirectly supported by the state, student achievement doesn't show any better results, whether it's public or school choice, whatever you've got there. It takes money from public schools, lack of space for additional kids with vouchers for school choice, and it's not sustainable long term. So I don't know how you guys would take that.
Well, from that couple of those points, Mike, I think first of all we'd look at when you look at a tuition base or the savings. The first question is providing opportunity for students that cannot have transportation to these facilities. A lot of times that's limited. In low economic areas, are they able to get them into a transportation to that private and parochial school? I think is number one. Number two, I also question, does that amount of money truly match what the tuition is at a private setting? If you look at Arizona, I believe the average amount of the system will be $6,500, and at private school settings in Arizona is high. It's $12,000 for that tuition. So are we meeting the needs of all, or is this you know, a tax credit or tax relief for some individuals? You know, it's just one side that will make that argument.
So yeah, there's lots of, I mean, there's lots of ways, there's lots of arguments in there.
Yeah.
First of all, I say it's really about, first of all, you know, giving the parents a primary role, and which is naturally theirs in directing their children's education. And when it comes to funding, should we be funding a student first or the system first? And recognizing that a lot of students are going to end up in the system, but if the parents are the ones making that decision, that's what we should be defaulting towards. And typically in the states where we have private school choice or education savings accounts, what you're seeing is, you know, private school tuition values are, there's a wide variety. I would probably disagree a little bit with your figures there, but the funding for the Mountain Public School in Arizona, for example, these ESAs, the students are getting 90% of what they would get in a public school. And families are using these to select a wide variety of different kinds of options. So I think it really comes down to the value of parental choice.
Got it.
I would say Ben is correct with the figure. The figure that I was giving was in a 9-12 setting, is the figure that I had.
So as people go to the ballot box in November, there's so many issues. There's proposals. We've got a governor's race here. And yet we know there are a lot of school board races as well. So when people go into the ballot box on November 8th, or vote absentee, which they can do pretty much now, how big of an issue do you think school choice is going to affect their voting decisions? Does it depend on district by district, depending on what the issues are? Like in Frankenmuth, for instance, you said you've got, what, 14 candidates running for, what, 4 spots in the school board?
12 candidates running for 4 spots. And I think school of choice is an issue with our district because the philosophy is we do not want to see it go over a 30% ratio for 30% of school of choice students into the community. So a lot of our candidates that are running are on that platform to keep the tradition and a value system in the community still a local-based ideal, and to make sure that we are having programs that meet the needs of our students that are in the community first, to make sure that they are receiving the excellent education that we have provided over the years and has been established in Frankenmuth. But I do also feel that you are seeing a lot of political follow-up from COVID pandemic, which opened the idea of choice, which opened the idea of parental voice, which now is continuing to be pushing political advocates from both sides, the left and the right.
I would say it's hard to measure exactly how much school choice is going to move votes individually. For most people, you're going to see things like the economy, right, are driving their decision. But education has definitely increased in priority for voters in the last couple of years because of COVID. And we've seen, I mean, actually, you can go back to 2018 as an example in the Florida election. We all know Governor DeSantis now, right? But before he became governor, he won an election there very narrowly because he took a stance on a school choice program in favor of defending a scholarship program that largely benefits low-income minority students. And a lot of minority moms voted for him over the Democratic candidate who opposed that issue. And we saw last year in Virginia where the new governor there, Youngkin, well, his opponent kind of stepped in it when he said something about parents don't have a right to control, direct their kids' education. And so parents, they're having more of a voice and more of a say, and we're seeing more, I think, parity between, if you believe strongly in education, you think Republicans and Democrats are doing about the same job, which is different than we've seen in the past.
And then at West Virginia, I think just this week, the Supreme Court there, the state Supreme Court, overturned an earlier court decision that had sort of rejected school choice. And so when I think about Michigan, we have a Republican-controlled House and Senate. It is now. Who knows what happens after this year. And we have a Democratic governor. The Republican-controlled House and Senate typically would support more school choice. Our governor doesn't. So can you envision down the road that this could lead to a court case too? Because when I think about this initiative, the Let My Kids Learn initiative, which has enough signatures to possibly put that on the ballot, right? I think it's in the hand of the Secretary of State. But anyway, what I'm saying is, don't you sense this is going down the same path of the West Virginias, the Kentuckys?
Possibly. So I mean, you brought up earlier some of
Yeah.
the examples of arguments against education
Right.
choice, one of them being the church-state issue. At the federal level, the U.S. Supreme Court's resolved that pretty clearly, that if parents have a neutral choice between a variety of religious and non-religious schools, then if the First Amendment doesn't violate that. But we've seen more recently cases like Espinoza and things that have said these old Blaine amendments that say no state dollars for sectarian aid can no longer be used to shut down, otherwise neutral school choice programs. Michigan is going to have a harder time catching up to states like West Virginia and Arizona because we have a unique constitutional amendment. But this Let My Kids Learn initiative, in my opinion, is one that if things shake out right could really benefit a lot of families who need that extra choice and opportunity. And it may take years for that all to play out for Michigan to catch up to other states, but it would be a real boon for families.
Yeah, we talked the Blaine Amendment, which
Correct.
1970.
1970,
right?
yes.
So
is
that would
correct.
have to be what? Overturned somehow.
Mhm.
Yeah. So let's change gears a little bit. I want to talk about virtual learning. As you well know, that was a big learning curve for a lot of educators. Some districts handled it well, some didn't have the resources. You didn't have the face-to-face learning. Post-pandemic, as you look at it, we have a lot of kids that kind of maybe lost a year. Districts like Frankenmuth may have not lost as much as others. So
Correct.
how do we do? As you look back on that, how do we do and what did we learn from that, I guess?
Okay, first of all, I would say, number one, we have to commend all educators, state and nationally, for being able to really pretty much create a system of instructional education and practices on the fly. This is nothing Pandemic 101 was never taught in our teacher education courses. So I have to commend all, it does not matter where they came from, what building, private or public, they did an outstanding job of trying to get ahead of the curve, number one. Number two, I think what we found from the virtual learning is while it is a means and a medium to actually educate, there's a lot of learning gap from it, from the fact that we could not, on a face-to-face level, it's easy to tell whether or not you're engaged in a conversation. But we could not do that on a virtual platform. Virtual platform does work for those that are needing it for remote learning or for specific reasons. But what we're finding now is going back to face-to-face and doing that in our setting is really catching up and really the best practice for teaching kids, especially at the adolescent level. The behaviorals piece is something that has been prominent coming out of pandemic and helping students with their behavioral and social norms. So that's really where we're at right now with it. And how are we trying to catch up? We are instituting a lot of after-school programs for remedial support and also what we call summer camps to help engage the students, not only from a academic mindset, but also a physical mindset, because we've had students that have been disengaged physically for 2 years. So I think that's an important piece to bring up as well.
Yeah, I think it's an unfair playing field from urban areas largely to more affluent districts. So is this an issue you guys are taking on there at ExcelinEd?
I mean, it is in the portfolio. I mean, we recognize, first of all, that there's a significant divide in the access students have to digital devices and technology, things based on their income and where they grew up. And I agree with a lot of what the superintendent was saying. Most students, virtual education doesn't work well for them. For some it does, but for most it doesn't.
Agreed.
The learning loss is going to be something we're dealing with for a generation. And it's not the fault of educators per se, it's the fault of a system that we weren't prepared for it. So we need a more flexible system. We need to put all solutions on the table, and we need parents and educators to be part of that decision-making process, because we just seen more than 20 years worth of gains, especially in math. The national test results came out last month. They're wiped out. And we're going to see the state results coming out soon, and they're not going to be any better. So we need to think about things in terms of flexibility, choice, creativity, innovation, and bringing parents and educators into that decision.
Which was so hard during the pandemic. I mean, if you had a two-parent household, working parent household, they had other kids at home, you have to make those choices, and a lot of them made the choice that, okay, mom or dad, you're going to have to stay home, because many of the kids were not able to guide the virtual learning just on themselves. That piece has to figure out just in providing some additional resources there. You have some national polling on education showing some different trends as it relates to sort of which of the major political parties you typically side with, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, what we're seeing typically, I think probably in the last, and I'm not a political scientist, but to the best of my understanding, typically in elections, and you ask which party does a better job of handling this issue or that, the Democratic Party has had an edge on education historically. I think the first time we've seen kind of that gap narrowed and collapsed is in the last few years. And I think a lot of that has to do with the parent frustration and the fact that what that's translating to in the state level is in the last election and probably in this election as well, control of a lot of the state legislative chambers where most education policy happens. Right? It's not DC, which is pretty dysfunctional, but it's in places like Lansing and Columbus, Ohio, and Madison, Wisconsin, where these decisions are being made, and a lot of Republicans have taken control of the state legislative chambers. And why that's significant is because, for whatever reason, they've tended to take more of a supportive role of choice, and parents I think, are seeing that. I showed how that played out in the Florida election, the Virginia election. I think we're going to see more of that trend play out in this election as well.
Greg, let me ask you about sort of the parental support, parental feedback. With you, with the school board, kind of an open office policy, people feel comfortable, you think, parents in your district to come out and talk about certain issues?
I do, and I think not only that, I think it's the job of the superintendent to be accessible. For instance, being a member of Rotary, being a member of Lions, and being a member of American Legion, being accessible outside so they can have that conversation. A lot of times we find that conversation is hard to have. We can call it an open door policy, but it still means that a parent has to come, possibly set up an appointment, and it becomes a kind of a tedious process. So I try to make myself accessible as much as possible. And like, for instance, tonight before the show, being at a cross-country meet and then at soccer simultaneously going back and forth.
Right.
Accessibility really allows our parents to really be able to have a voice and also a choice in the process. And that's really what we try to emulate in Frankenmuth.
Okay. One area I definitely want to get into before you guys get off, because it goes fast,
Yeah.
and this is a good subject. I want to talk about school staffing. It's just staffing in any business and organization right now has been very hard, but schools particularly, and I'm not just talking teachers, staffing overall, administrative support, school bus drivers. So how are you guys taking that on? How are things going from a staffing standpoint? You're short there too, right?
Right. We are short one staff member, a teacher at this time in the elementary music. We are fortunate to have a retired teacher in that certification back with us at this time to help out. But we're finding that there is definitely, no bones about it, there is a teacher shortage, not only at the state level, but also national level. And I really believe what we have to do as a society is look at different credentials or different means of certification. That this one-size-fits-all certification does not work. We have to look at potential individuals out of professions coming in and having the opportunity to maybe do an alternate certification program or an annual authorization program to get them involved into the school districts. I think it's, again, looking outside of a box and really trying to find ways and avenues of approach to bring them in. We do that currently with career technical education. If we want to teach our kids carpentry, we can bring in a local construction management individual to teach that and have it as a state certified program.
So are you able to communicate, collaborate with the local colleges, for instance, like an SVSU, Delta, Northwood, to make sure that this still is an attractive profession for people to get into? How do you sort of market that? Because this is a tough road. I mean, teaching is hard. It's harder now than it's ever been. So how do you make it continually attractive for the young people that still say this is a noble profession, you can make a difference here, let's do this?
Well, I think from a high school level, you get kids involved in the teacher cadet program, which is a career technical education program. It allows them to start working as an intern in the lower grade levels so they can kind of get their taste of what it is to be an educator. It's providing them with strong mentors that are educators currently that can kind of teach them the way, not only coaches, but also instructional educators. I think it's also working hand in hand with schools like SVSU, Michigan State, Michigan, all our universities that have education programs to really be a sounding board of what we need currently.
Right.
You look at SVSU currently, and they only have one individual that is going to be certified in math this year. Math is definitely a critical shortage list across the state, so we need more than one instructor coming out of a school like that. So
Right.
it's really a mindset of what the needs are and trying to promote that with students today.
Right, and then you're seeing an increase in homeschooling too, right? They're kind of getting away from the traditional school. You seeing that?
I think this all ties together under the theme of what I brought up earlier, which is flexibility, and I really like the idea what you're seeing in other states, Arizona actually being one of them, where they're working to bring in non-traditional educators, career switchers or whatever into the profession to bring their expertise into the classroom, because the future education system is going to be more flexible and more diverse. Everything we're seeing from like hybrid homeschooling, where families are homeschooling part-time and coming together and schooling, or these micro schools where you have multiple grades and different levels, in addition to things like CTE and apprenticeship programs and a variety of different. And with that, we're going to need a variety of skills and educators. And so I think what the lesson is, less of the rigid top-down policy, more flexibility and bottom-up policy.
Right, right. And I think you're seeing that in Michigan today. When you talk to Representative Amos O'Neill or Senator Ken Horn, they recognize that. That is some of the voice that they bring back to Lansing. And Lansing is starting to recognize that there should be alternative means for certification. We do see alternative certification programs currently in the state of Michigan, but I think we need to expand them, possibly looking more like a trade of apprenticeships, so to speak. But we continue to look at opportunities for all individuals to bring into the educational field. I think we'll get through this quicker than what we really are anticipating for.
Right. It's great having you guys in, because we talked about it earlier. We're seeing a lot of ads for the election on education. You're getting these 15, 20-second sound bites that don't tell the whole story. They're a bit over the top, and this is a good opportunity for two expert educators to come in and give our viewers kind of this is how it is. Let's dive deeper into this issue, and if you're going to the ballot box, make sure you do your homework. So thanks for coming in, guys. Good conversation.
Thank you, Mike.
And that's our show for tonight, but be sure to join us again next week for the follow-up. We'll take on the abortion rights debate with two people on opposite sides of that issue. In the meantime, hit me up on social media or dial into our follow-up hotline to voice your opinion or suggest future show topics. We'd really like to hear from you. Thanks for tuning in tonight. We'll see you next week. Have a great night, everyone.